In the second section of Chapter 13, we want to dig a little deeper into classification. So we're going to look at prokaryotes versus eukaryotes, we're going to look at something known as an endospore, and then we're going to look through the major kingdoms of domain eukarya. So again, remember, domains are categorized based on whether they're prokaryotes or eukaryotes. So those first two domains we talked about, domain bacteria and archaea, these are considered to be some of the oldest forms of life, and they are both prokaryotes. So again, remember that means their cell does not have a nucleus. Their cell does also not have membrane-bound organelles. Most prokaryotes are unicellular, which also means they're microscopic, and we typically call those organisms microorganisms or microbes. Now, one particular type of bacteria that's mentioned by name in your textbook is cyanobacteria. Because cyanobacteria used to be known as blue-green algae, but it's special because not only is it bacteria, but it has the ability to go through photosynthesis. So most biologists believe that cyanobacteria is one of our most primitive organisms, and it actually supplied oxygen to the atmosphere before plants were here. Cyanobacteria also has the ability to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere into a usable form for other organisms. So cyanobacteria are a very, very unique organism. Now, what's interesting is, a lot of times we consider humans as being the greatest organisms that have ever existed, and one of the reasons that we think this is because we say that humans can be found anywhere on the planet, but that's actually not true. Bacteria and archaea can be found anywhere on the planet. Specifically, archaea able to withstand extreme environments like the middle picture here with these hot springs. We can find bacteria inside rocks, which is obviously somewhere humans cannot be. We can find them in hydrothermal vents. We can find them trapped under Antarctic ice sheets. We can find them in high salt, high temperature habitats. We can find them in or on other organisms. And so what's interesting about bacteria is in some conditions that you would think would kill them, some of them have the ability to resist it because they have the ability to form what we call endospores. Endospores is basically a shell that forms around the genetic material of certain bacteria, and it allows them to go dormant and withstand conditions that are unfavorable in hopes that conditions will become favorable again. This is the reason why it's really hard to get rid of all the bacteria from things, because some of the bacteria has the ability to form endospores. This is also the reason why if you want clean water that you get from a river or a lake, you have to boil it, because boiling is the only thing that actually gets rid of the endospores. Now, we want to focus the rest of our attention here on domain eukarya. Now remember, these are organisms that are eukaryotes, so they have a nucleus, they have a membrane-bound organelle, and remember we already established there are 4 kingdoms that are found within domain eukarya. And we just want to look at a couple characteristics about each of these kingdoms. So we're actually going to start out with kingdom Protista. This is the one that you probably know the least amount. These are the simplest eukaryotes. Those organisms that fall in kingdom Protista, they're similar to animals, similar to fungus, similar to plants. This is what I typically call our catch-all category, because they aren't really animals, they aren't really fungus, they aren't really plants, so we put them in here. Now, the organisms that fall in kingdom Protista typically fall in one of 2 categories. We either consider them to be algae, meaning they are photosynthetic, they make their own food, or they're protozoans, which means they're heterotrophs and they have to consume some type of organic material. Now what's interesting about protozoans is they can digest cellulose that humans can't. So we think of things like amoebas and paramecium and euglena. Protista kingdom is very, very diverse, and we typically categorize them based on what they're most alike. So those protists that are more like animals are put in one category. Those protists that are like fungus are put in a category. Protists that are like plants put in a category. So definitely categorized based on what they are similar to, although they're not similar enough to be in those specific groups. The second kingdom is kingdom Animalia. Now these are typically multicellular organisms. They are heterotrophs, so animals typically they have to feed off of other things to get energy. They have the ability to move, meaning they're motile, and very, very diverse. Now typically, once we have the kingdom Animalia established for an organism, we then have to decide which category of animal it falls under. Is it an invertebrate, meaning without a backbone, or a vertebrate with a backbone? So just very quickly, these would be your invertebrate categories. So it ranges from sponges, which are the simplest form, all the way to chordates, which are the most complex. So sponges, they're filter feeders, they're sessile, meaning they don't move, but they do fall under kingdom Animalia because of their basic structure. Cnidarians, which are going to be like your jellyfish, they have radial symmetry, meaning they're circular. They have stinging cells. A third category, mollusca, or mollusks. So these are going to be things like clams, soft bodies with a hard shell. Worms, flatworms, roundworms, segmented worms. Arthropods, which are your segmented animals. These typically have an exoskeleton, so we think of like insects or crabs. Echinoderms, which are going to be like your starfish. And then chordates, which are more complex animals with spinal cords but don't yet have a vertebrate or a backbone yet. The other category of animals are going to be your vertebrates that have a backbone. These will be your fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals. We all know the difference in these, but just a couple of quick characteristics. We know fishes are aquatic. They have a two-chambered heart, and they're ectothermic, meaning they're cold-blooded. So they typically take on the temperature of their surroundings. Amphibians can be on land or water. Three-chambered heart, also cold-blooded. Reptiles live land or water. Three- or four-chambered heart, also ectothermic. They're cold-blooded. So you think about snakes, they have to be really careful in the summer because if they get too hot, just like their surroundings, it'll kill them. Birds and mammals are endothermic. We're warm-blooded. We have four-chambered hearts, so we're a little more effective at gas exchange, and we have the ability to maintain our own steady body temperature. Third kingdom would be kingdom fungi. A lot of people think these are plants, but they're not. They cannot move. And the key characteristic of fungus is they reproduce using spores, and the spores are what are actually given off. Fungus is a heterotroph. That's why it's not a plant. So it's going to digest materials by secreting enzymes. And typically, they break down dead material, which is why they're known as decomposers. Fungus include things like mushroom, things like athlete's foot. You can see mold growing on fruit, or also a fungus inside of your body. Fungi typically are found either in yeast form or mold form that can be used by us. We know yeast is used in the fermentation process for bread and for alcohol. We know mold. It can spoil food, but it's also used to make flavorful cheeses. And a lot of our antibiotics that treat bacteria actually come from mold, penicillin coming from mold. And then finally, kingdom plantae. Which, again, plants are going to be multicellular eukaryotes. We know they're sessile, they're autotrophic, and then plants fall into a couple of categories of whether they're non-flowering seed plants or you're flowering.